For the past week, I have been part of a one-man campaign to spread awareness of the fact that the majority of Democrats in both the House and Senate, the party of resistance, the party of opposition, the guys that call themselves being so sick and tired of all those bad things Trump's doing, decided as a bulk to vote with the Republicans to give Trump a military budget of 717 billion. Let me say a little bit envoy. And so the way this worked is that I would respond to posts that were already political. So it's not like, oh, I'm listening to this one singer and they're writing, and then somebody's coming over here with some political nonsense. Um, and I would say, hey, this happened, and then include a link to the video I did about it. And I did this about maybe 300 or 400 times. And someone would say it's excessive. Someone would say that is crazy. I would say it shows my disdain and disgust with the fact that this happened, because I have been grossed out with the idea that we can have a country where half the people, 63% actually, can't afford a $1,000 emergency, and yet somehow we can give the military hundreds of billions of dollars. It didn't make sense to me. You say hello to Angel as well, if I'm saying your name correctly. But when I did this, for the most part, I didn't get a response, and I chalked it up to the fact that people get all kind of back and forths online, and they don't really tend to respond to most of them after getting so many of them. So I didn't really take it personally. But the couple I did were an assortment that I started to lump into three categories. You had the people who would say, I agree with you on this. People who would say this is a good thing, and then other ones who kind of did the little um, it went into a direction that's just bizarre. But the ones that agreed with me and chose not to agree in some cases, I appreciated for the fact that they could admit I had no idea this happened because the corrupt media didn't say a word about it, which was my main reason for posting as much as I did. Now, a couple of responses stood out. There was one person who goes on Trump's Twitter and he writes, oh, you've been caught. And he posts a picture of him holding some copy of a novel that I think it said something to the equivalent of everything Trump touches goes away or fades away or whatever it was. I haven't read the book. I'm familiar with it, but its name is escaping me at the moment. But he posts this picture on Trump's account, and so I responded to that post and I mentioned the money thing, and then I like and retweet my own thing, and he goes and screenshots this and goes, it must be very healthy to be retweeting and liking your own stuff. And I look at this comment and I say, hey, look, I'm gonna keep. I don't see what the point of the screenshot was. It's not like I'm gonna delete the fact that I did that. I can own up to it. But another person comes around, screenshots again, is like, well, this seems to be the main thing and the only thing you talk about. I'm like, well, yeah, if you're gonna have an issue that afflicts the lives of 300 million people, which is the number that live in the U.S., why wouldn't you talk about it, extensively? And so this ends that second person's entry, but the first person, I basically say, your strategy is to go and mess with a guy that literally will never read a single word you write to him because there's so many people just flooding his page with all of this stuff. And then his response is to say that my strategy is to criticize both parties, when in fact my perspective was to make people aware of a story that just was not being talked about. And I ended up basically not responding because I came to the conclusion that, yeah, it's a waste of time to go back and forth with these people. And that is something that happened in many cases where there was another person who said, and now you have to remember, this story of this 717 billion is one that is ripe with the fact that if you don't believe anything I'm saying, you can look all of this up. I can provide you with articles that can, even in some cases, show you who voted for it. We have the House and Senate roll calls, which tell you who voted, who didn't vote for it. Now, another person said, and keep this in mind, that my sharing of this story, which, as I just said to you, you can prove from both these websites as well as the official Senate.gov website, which also has to do with this story, that this is something that is along the lines of Infowars, which is a conspiracy group that Alex Jones or whatever. But um, I end up responding to his thing, and I say, "Hey, I have my sources. What are you, talking about?" And he says that you have to have your head and your behind to think that the Democrats and Republicans are the same. And so I say to him, "Look, these parties, no matter who you put in office, that member of Congress is going to vote on legislation. If both parties in general vote the exact same on a bill, what was the difference of them in that moment or in other moments where they did the same thing?" Just really like remove yourself from this partisan view and actually think to yourself, if you're going to have a member of Congress who votes one way as well as this other party does, and then the rest of his party votes the same way as the other party, what's the difference? See, you give me thanks. But this was really aggravating, so I left that where it is. There was another person who, and this is kind of where we go to the bait and switch kind of comments. So in a lot of cases, I had people who left stuff that I felt was so short sighted, I just couldn't motivate myself to respond back to them. There was one person who said, "Oh, you have a problem with funding the military?" And obviously, if someone is complaining about a particular bill and specifying 717 billion, you can kind of conclude their problem lies in the fact that it was that much, and you can reasonably believe that it might have been that it was too much, for their cup of coffee, or it was just something that they didn't think needed to be the amount in total. You could have had a lower budget and they wouldn't have been as upset. But answers like that, I just don't see a future for a good dialogue with, so I avoided that. Then there was another person who, wrote that uh, this was that me bringing up the fact that both parties voted for this was semantics. And then after I told them, no, this is, um, you know, excesses of money that both parties agreed to fork off to the military while half the U.S. is poor, and their response was to say, vote your heart in this election. And I just looked at that keyboard and just did this. I was astonished. We have so many people who it seems log on. And this is what I kind of why I became a little more disturbed. We have so many people who log on to these websites and are politically, active, and they go and they post something over and over again about a certain topic. But it seems that we can never quite get them to entirely stop and think, is this right? Should you be, viewing this way? They just don't want to hear it. Um, and there was another person who told me to join the military so I could get some of the funding, and I told them, and also there was a comment that was left on there about, what do you mean you don't want to fund the military? And the person responded to them and said, domestic programs could have used this money. Their response was to say, oh, but there are plenty of folks that are getting paid. And also, I want to ask the three of you that are in here, do you know what the total is of Americans that are in the military that are going to be eligible for this money? Does anyone know the percentage? Anyone? I'll tell you, it's 0.4. Now think about this. You're going to take 700 billion, and we know what the money is going to. There's an article that specifies it. Um, Now that there's, yeah, nice to see you. But well, Envoy, I just said the number. It's 0.4 people. That accounts for the amount of Americans that are in the military. In all of its branches, 1 million people out of 300 million. But I want to ask you this: can you just like logically see why someone would not take a bulk of their funds and give it to something that literally affects less than 1% of the whole population versus the rest of us? And I guess that's what I hate about commenting on a lot of this stuff is that if I were to go and tell him, hey, you're trying to defend giving all this money to less than 1% the U.S., he's not going to say, I didn't know that number, or that's a good point. No, what he'll say is, well, so what? It's still helping somebody, or not respond, or give me some answer that can't just admit, yeah, this was not that well thought out by me, or this is actually a good point. You can't get it. Everybody just wants to be right and have the last word, and it felt like I was getting that over and over again when I was engaging in these interactions. Like it didn't matter what my comment was, the person always, as long as they were trying to be negative and nasty, had something to say back. In the case of this guy that was talking about the military, I told him, why would anyone? And also, let me clarify this: I have no problem with people who serve, but I truly believe in the span of the last 50, 60 years, you have been serving a country that doesn't give anything a hoot about you. You have a government that treats veterans terribly. You have people who, like what I find so funny is there's this idea that if you go and serve, you can get benefits from society. Um, and I guarantee you that if you went to any neighborhood that was on the rougher side across all of the U.S., you being a veteran would not stop someone from robbing you, or killing you, or doing anything else that is considered, standard for the average Joe, or just a person that didn't serve. So, again, if you want to do it for yourself, not because someone told you that this would be a benefit for the U.S. Um, if the leadership, and what I find so funny is that when I was going back and forth with this person, it's like they could never get that me and the people who, like, I'm someone who would be considered a dove on war just on these conflicts, but me and the people who advocate for these conflicts are sitting on two sides of the same coin. Whereas there are people who advocate for it, and I'm a person who advocates against it. The similarity we both have is that neither of us is going to ever go into any of these conflicts. Um, but the difference is that I respect the lives of those who are willing to go, which is why I don't want them to go and die in some conflict that is a waste of time. Envoy says pawns in a chess game, I guess. Yeah, it could be considered that. But I just really want you to understand what is most disturbing is the fact that we have had an excess of money that was stolen from the American taxpayer, and no one wants to consider anything about it other than to just say it is what it is. People, when Bernie, for example, talks about Medicare for all or some other domestic program, they go and they ask, how much does this cost? Where are you getting the money from? How are you paying for this? Um, but when you look at something such as this 700 billion, where is that coming from? How are they getting the money for this? How are they paying for this? No one asked that. I have not seen a single person ask where this money is coming from. Now that day has come, says, which is freaking mind boggling. Envoy says it is alarming the amount that gets pumped into the military. Yeah. And what should also be disturbing is the fact that we have these, like when I did the Twilight Zone stream, I did that because it felt like everything was in a bizarro world. Like we talked about the thing with these chicks. You have these guys who are relatively slim, have decent jobs, actually have a future going on or working towards something. Most other males would if they're speaking, with, like, most people just would not say as some excessively disgusting looking person, and yet they find themselves having the most difficult of times with something that other people call, very basic. Um, and that it doesn't just stop there. After someone else makes that choice to not be involved, you become the villain for their motive. But also with this, you go out and you have this story that the media doesn't report, that all these corporations keep quiet about, that all of these senators vote for like drones, and without any sense of individuality, save for a few people, and no one chooses to connect the dots. No one sits there and says, why is this the way it is? Who started this? What's causing this? And it just seems like all we do is sit here week after week being in this scenario where we can't exactly figure it out, and we just have to accept that everyone's like chosen to turn their brain off. And when you sit there and you say, "Hey, wait a second, what's going on?" You're left alone. You're left with 5 or 6 people that might get this, and others that just say, "No, accept it for what it is." Let the military spend hundreds of billions of dollars while we have people who can't even afford, um, again, $1,000 emergency. I guess the best thing about the military service is that it does provide a job career path. Imagine the young men that would go astray without the military service. No, I'm not. I'm not complaining about the military itself. I'm complaining about this idea that people who have not gone keep trying to advocate for these conflicts, keep trying to get the people who are serving killed with all of these different events we have going on. There is a serious push by Israel and by the U.S. right now for a war with Iran that, Netanyahu and Trump aren't going to have to worry about getting killed in. They're going to be sitting up in their air conditioned mansions while all these other people get slaughtered and blown to pieces. And the saddest thing is that their supporters will never say, "Hey, wait a second. You just sent all these people out to die for nothing." It never gets touched. And it's the same thing with this budget. We have a system where you can go online, you can tell people about something, and you get the most infuriating responses and this narcissistic refusal for someone to just drop it. Like with me, if I respond to you more than twice and you still can't get it, I'm done. And I'm done because there are too many people in this world to try and inform of an issue, to have someone purposely sit there and refuse to comprehend it. And it becomes very evident of who's actually purposely not trying to get it when you sit here and talk to them. So it's sad, but I'll try to do another stream right now about another topic that annoys me. So we'll keep the fight going, and I'll give you another update next week. Those are some of the responses I've gotten. They've been insane, to put it lightly. So thank you.